Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell with the law firm of Dell and Schaefer, and I'm joined today by Stephen Jessup. And we're going to talk about one of Stephen's recently resolved cases against JP Morgan Chase. And Stephen, in these cases, we like to talk about the history of the claim, how you were able to help the claimant, and then provide some tips that other people who are in a similar situation with JP Morgan, or as you're going to discuss, Sedgwick as the third-party administrator, tips that they could take away from this that would help them with their claim. So let's get into the background of this claim, and then we'll also talk a little bit about the relationship of how Sedgwick got involved with this particular claim.
Okay, so I guess just to get in how Sedgwick got involved. So my client worked for JP Morgan Chase in New York City as in IT, one of the managers there. Filed a claim for disability. Sedgwick is a third-party administrator, which means JP Morgan Chase hired them to determine if the client was disabled, and if the client's disabled, JP Morgan Chase is responsible for paying those short-term disability benefits. Sedgwick is one of the largest third-party administrators. We've discussed them quite a bit, throughout our website. So this client of mine contacted me very late in the game. He had filed a claim for disability in July of 2020 and contacted me in December after his claim had already been denied. He had already appealed, and at this point he had just received the reports from two of Sedgwick's doctors during the appeal process, and he was given an opportunity to respond to those reports. So got me in the 11th hour. Initially, he went out on disability following a removal of a tumor on his shoulder, melanoma tumor. And while he was out recovering from that surgery, aggravated a pre-existing condition that he'd had, not pre-existing for purpose of policy,
Right.
but a pre-existing medical condition with his shoulder that would eventually necessitate having surgery performed. When Sedgwick denied his claim initially, they said, well, listen, the melanoma's been removed. You have these shoulder problems. Our doctor doesn't think it's severe enough that you can't return to work, and we're denying the claim beyond September 2nd. Being in New York City at the time, too, elective surgeries were not being performed, and it was considered an elective surgery even though it was a necessity to have done, so it wasn't scheduled till sometime in November.
Because of COVID.
Because of COVID.
Right.
So it was really throwing this extra wrench into it about the continuation of his medical problems. So when he contacted me, I reviewed the reports, took a look at everything here, and what stood out to me the most is this guy had a very complex medical timeline. And the reports from Sedgwick's doctors, one was on occupational medicine, so looking at the physical problems, and the other was a psychiatrist, because the client also suffered from bipolar, which was also causing problems. And they were kind of just trying to look at everything piecemeal and not having a full timeline. One of the biggest things, in my opinion, that really, when I argued in kind of supplementing his appeal and making arguments and additional information, Sedgwick didn't even provide the reviewing occupational medicine doctor with all of the medical records about the surgery date coming up. Also, they were aware that the client also had an aggravated issue in a neck that was compressing the nerves in his neck and all this stuff. They were all aware of this, but when they had their doctor do a peer review, which his reports were dated after the surgery date and all this other stuff, there's no mention as to it. So if it had only been relied upon in this very small thing having to do with the shoulder issue from July to September, chances are they would have continued to deny the claim. So we were able to really create a strong timeline of medical, show how everything stacked up, and that at no period during this would he have been able to return to work from any of his conditions. Got additional information from his psychiatrist and how the bipolar would impact also the ability to work in relation, in conjunction with the physical. So there were so many, moving pieces and parts, and he was at a point where he was just thinking about giving up and trying to return to work because he had no money coming in at that point.
And how did you learn everything that Sedgwick did or didn't do?
It was a very quick crash course in trying to get, just from their medical reviews, I think I was able to garner quite a bit of information. And the other problem that we had, there was two claims that he filed, because he didn't know. He's like, well, they denied the one, and I have this other issue, so I'll file a claim for that. Sometimes people mistake disability claims, kind of like with a personal injury or workers' compensation, where there's one injury or one accident, and that's in its own individual claim. So trying to piece together various correspondence that he had received from the period of July through December, I was able to kind of get a really good idea. And my response to the peer review reports was due well before we were going to be able to get any copies of the claim file. So it was really trying to piece that together and see where there was, misses. And I wouldn't say necessarily willful attempts, but there was at least an incompetence in the claim review process and not trying to put all the pieces together. And that could be part because he filed 2 claims as opposed to just the 1.
And what was his occupation?
He was he was like basically like a manager overseeing a IT department for JP Morgan Chase. So he was a, sophisticated worker, relatively high up, not like a line item, worker for them. So, getting even to the occupational side of things. And also with COVID, there was also the issues and concerns being in New York City, having to argue about could he do his job because is it doing his job from home? Was it doing his job in his regular work setting? So there was a lot of little weird nuances that you don't necessarily normally see in a lot of disability, short-term disability cases at least.
And what was the definition of disability in the policy?
The inability to perform the material and substantial duties of your regular occupation.
When you got involved, though, you were looking at 2 medical reviews that were basically saying that he could go and do his job. And were they considering that job to be a sedentary type job, or did they even evaluate the duties of the job?
From the occupational medicine, yes, they were kind of looking at it as a sedentary to light duty capacity. Even though the doctor, I don't even necessarily think even made a rendering on that. It was more just about, I see no need for restrictions and limitations, which when you don't have all the medical information, that seems reasonable enough, that Sedgwick didn't provide you with everything he needed to know. As you know, it can be quite difficult during an appeal process, now under Department of Labor regulations, Sedgwick or any insurance company doing a review has to give you any information that's negative to your case to give you the chance to respond. From my experience, it almost seems like that's just a step in the game for them. They have to do it, so they cross it off, and it's hard because now you got to convince a doctor who thinks your client's fine that they're wrong. So in this situation, though, we were able to successfully do that, not only on the physical component but also on the mental health component of it. Looking into the future, because the big thing for us is we have to find a way to get him on claim. Knowing that it's going to transition to long-term disability, which is through Prudential. We know that there's going to be the limitations for mental health there, but we wanted to at least set him up to even get his foot in the door, and then build up all the other information, to support should his claim in long-term disability, be extended.
What do you think the claimant could have done differently to have avoided the denial?
Honestly, in looking back on it, I think if he had just probably consulted an attorney sooner. I think the writing was on the wall in early correspondence, and there was enough there that, when him and I spoke initially, he was able to give me a good idea of what was going on, but it seems like that was, even if it was conveyed to Sedgwick, they weren't hearing it. So I think possibly if it gotten someone involved, this was more a matter of really presenting of information. They had the information, but they just weren't putting the pieces of it together.
What's your general opinion on Sedgwick's claim handling?
I personally, I hate Sedgwick cases. In all honesty, as a third-party administrator, they're one of the most notorious.
Well, you don't hate the cases.
I don't hate the cases. I hate them as it. I think the big problem with it, and I explained to people too, is they have no real horse in the race. If there's a denial and lawsuits are filed, since they're not the one financially responsible for making the payment, they're not even the party that necessarily gets sued to get that money. It's the employer. So what do they have to lose? It's almost like their role is to try to save companies money by denying cases. And you see more and more large corporations using them as a third-party administrator. And at least in this case, thankfully for long-term disability, you have a regular insurance company here, in this case Prudential, and it's underwritten by Prudential. So, it's a little different. But Sedgwick, I just feel like it's really shoddy claims handling, very, very much so. I'm actually, personally speaking, my father, his former employer had Sedgwick as their TPA. And when he had to file for various things, I was like, well, if you have any issues, let me know. And at least in his situations, it went very smooth. I told him, big surprise, because normally we do see this level of just really bad claims review. and just, I don't know, it seems real minor league.
Well, I think because Sedgwick is basically on a contract with these companies, and they're either getting, we don't know the details of their agreement, it's different with every company, but it could be a pay per case, it could be a flat monthly fee. So if you have 500 employees that make a claim in a year, or if you have 50 employees, we're going to charge you the same amount. Or, you know, sometimes if it's just a claim handling, it's this, but if it goes to appeal, we charge you this. So there's a whole gamut of what they can do. But you're right in the sense that they don't necessarily care as much. Some people could say, well, that's a positive because it's not their money. But at the same token, they don't care because there's no reputation for Sedgwick per se, because if the employee who wants to get paid is complaining and the employer doesn't have to pay out money, they're not going to go and say, Sedgwick, hey, you guys aren't doing a good job because you're not paying out our money. So their incentive is to pay out as little as possible potentially so that they save the employer money. And really the goal that Sedgwick, I think, tries to market is that we are going to help get your employees back to work. It's all about return to work. And they have these books that they use for return to work guidelines, which is why your client, when he had a shoulder surgery, they said, okay, that's normally 90 days and then you should be back. And then their doctors go along for the ride and say 90 days you should be back. But this was a great victory that you had for this particular client, especially when 2 of their doctors reviewed on appeal already and said, you know, we don't think you're disabled. What we recommend, obviously, is don't do the appeal on your own so you don't get put in that position, because I would say that 80% of the time it's going to be hard for us as lawyers to convince 2 doctors who are already opined that they don't think you're disabled that you are disabled. In this case, there happened to be some missing medical information and some other strategies that you came up with, but that's clearly not the norm. So the best thing is, like you said, is hire a lawyer earlier to put a strategy together for the appeal to try to avoid having to convince the doctors who are already in the pocket of the company per se to change their mind.
And one of the things I also, and when I spoke to him, I was very frank. I'm like, listen, I don't know what we're going to be able to do. This is the 11th hour. It's going to be difficult. It's certainly worth pursuing if you're not able to return to work. And you say that, you know, Sedgwick prides itself in trying to get people back to work. My experience, it's by denying their claims and leaving them no choice but to try to return to work. But here, when you know, knowing that he had the Prudential long-term disability policy, you know, the long-term plan for him even was, hey, even if they deny this, we will still go forward and make an application with Prudential for long-term. And if that's approved, we'll leverage that against the short-term. So there were still moves on the chessboard for him to make. Thankfully, though, it was the smoother, easier route to try to get him instead of a lot of, you know, ongoing fight. And, you know, he's been paid.
So, and now you'll transition him into Prudential long-term disability for as long as he needs that. So if you're someone who's working with JP Chase and has a long-term or short-term disability issue, feel free to reach out to Stephen or myself. We'll always provide you with an immediate free consultation. No matter where you live in the country, we can help you, and we look forward to the opportunity to speak with you. Hi, I'm Gregory Dell, the managing attorney of Dell Disability Lawyers, and I hope you find the video you just watched helpful. We put these videos out all of the time, and we'd love if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. Beyond our videos on our YouTube channel, we also have lots of information available on our website at diattorney.com, and we encourage you to come to our website. The goal is that we want you to be educated about the disability insurance process, and when you get to our website, you'll see that we have information all about your specific disability insurance company, your occupation, and your medical condition. And we've designed our website such that you can easily search our website to find things that you may specifically be looking for. Now, at our website, we have thousands and thousands of pages of information, hundreds of videos that you can search, plus we're building a section of reviews of all the disability insurance companies, and we have the Ask Our Lawyer section where you can go ahead and ask us any questions that you may have. Now, we realize that you may not need us right now, but you may need us in the future to help you with your disability claim, and we think one of the best ways to keep in touch is by clicking the button below and subscribing to our channel. And most importantly, again, no matter where you live in the country, we're always available. Just go ahead and give us a call. We're happy to discuss your claim and let you know immediately if we can help you.